A badge is supposed to protect and serve, but for Officer Bradley Collins, it was simply a license to bully. When he violently slammed a terrified black teenager against a diner table, he thought he was untouchable. He had no idea the boy's father was a high-ranking FBI agent about to dismantle his entire life. The neon sign of Rusty's Diner buzzed with a low, steady hum, casting a flickering red hue across the rain-slicked pavement of Oakhaven, a quiet, predominantly white, affluent suburb in upstate New York. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of slow, dragging night where the diner was occupied only by a few regulars, the smell of stale coffee, and the sizzle of cheap burgers on a flat-top grill. Sitting alone in a corner booth was 15-year-old Tyler Jenkins. Tyler was a good kid, an honor roll student, a varsity track runner, and a boy who had been taught from a very young age exactly how to conduct himself in public. He wore a simple grey high school athletics hoodie, his backpack resting on the faded vinyl seat beside him. Spread out across the table were his AP history textbooks and a half-empty vanilla milkshake. He was minding his own business, occasionally glancing at the clock above the counter. He was waiting for his father. His father, Harry Jenkins, had been out of town for 3 weeks on what he always vaguely described to Tyler as a complex corporate audit. In reality, Harry was a veteran supervisory special agent for the Federal Bureau of Investigation, deeply embedded in a high-stakes undercover operation involving interstate narcotics trafficking. Tonight was supposed to be their reunion, a simple dinner at a roadside diner halfway between Harry's drop point and their home. The bell above the diner door chimed sharply, breaking the quiet murmur of the room. The cold night air rushed in, bringing with it Officer Bradley Collins of the Oakhaven Police Department. Collins was a heavy-set man in his late 40s, his uniform stretched tight across his chest, his duty belt sitting low on his hips. He was a 15-year veteran of the force, a man whose personnel file was thick with excessive force complaints, civilian harassment grievances, and racial profiling accusations. Yet, in a town like Oakhaven, where the police union was strong and the department closed ranks around its own, Collins had never faced anything more than a verbal warning. He was a man who craved authority, a small-town tyrant who used his badge to compensate for his own deep-seated insecurities. Collins shook the rein from his broad shoulders, his eyes scanning the room. He nodded curtly to Stella Higgins, the diner's middle-aged manager, who was wiping down the counter. Then, his gaze landed on booth 4. He stopped, his eyes narrowed. To Collins, Tyler wasn't a student doing homework. To Collins, a young black teenager sitting alone in his town late at night was inherently suspicious. It was a prejudice baked so deeply into his bones that it dictated his every move. Ignoring the open stools at the counter and the free coffee Stella offered, Collins slowly unhooked his radio mic, adjusted his heavy utility belt, and walked with heavy, deliberate footsteps toward the back of the diner. The sound of his heavy tactical boots echoing against the black and white checkered floor caused a few patrons to look up from their meals. Tyler, deeply engrossed in an essay about the Cold War, didn't notice the officer until a shadow fell over his textbook. "Diners for paying customers, kid." Collins' gruff, abrasive voice shattered Tyler's concentration. Tyler jumped slightly, looking up into the cold, aggressive face of the police officer. Tyler swallowed hard, his heart rate instantly spiking. He remembered his father's instructions. "Stay calm. Be polite. Keep your hands where they can see them." "I am a paying customer, officer," Tyler said, his voice remarkably steady, despite the sudden adrenaline dumping into his system. He pointed to the milkshake glass. "And I'm waiting for my dad. We're having dinner." Collins sneered, leaning heavily against the edge of the table, encroaching on Tyler's personal space. He looked at the history book, then back at Tyler, his expression practically dripping with disbelief and contempt. "Waiting for your dad, huh? Where's he at?" "Prison?" Tyler froze. The sheer malice in the question took the air out of his lungs. "Excuse me?" "You heard me," Collins snapped. his voice rising in volume, clearly intending to make a scene, to assert his dominance. "I asked you a question. You don't look like you're from around here. What's your name, boy?" "Tyler." "Tyler Jenkins, sir." Tyler kept his hands flat on the table, palms down, just like his father had taught him. "We live in the next county over. My dad is meeting me here." "I don't buy it," Collins growled. "You're loitering. You look like you're casing the joint. Let me see some ID. I'm 15. Sir." "I only have my high school ID," Tyler explained, his voice trembling slightly now. The injustice of the situation was suffocating, but fear was rapidly taking over. "I don't care if it's a library card, give it to me." "Now." Collins slammed his palm flat against the table, rattling Tyler's glass. It's in my backpack, sir," Tyler said softly. "I have to reach into my bag to get it. Then get it. And do it slow," Collins ordered, his hand instinctively dropping to rest on the butt of his taser. Tyler slowly reached toward the bag beside him. The zipper was stuck. As he pulled slightly harder to unjam the zipper of the dark nylon backpack, his elbow knocked his textbook off the table. The heavy hardcover book hit the floor with a loud, resounding thwack. It was a harmless accident. A dropped book. But for Officer Bradley Collins, it was the excuse he had been looking for. "I said slow, you little punk," Collins roared. Before Tyler could even process the words, Collins lunged across the table. Violence, when it happens in a quiet place, feels deafening. Collins' large, calloused hands clamped down on the collar of Tyler's hoodie with bone-jarring force. Tyler gasped as he was violently yanked up from the vinyl seat. The teenager weighed barely 140 pounds. Collins was a muscular 250. The physical mismatch was absolute. "Hey, what are you doing?" Tyler cried out, sheer panic taking over as he was dragged across the table. The remaining milkshake spilled, pooling over his history essay. "Stop resisting. Quit fighting me," Collins bellowed at the top of his lungs, a textbook tactic used by corrupt officers to justify their own brutality for the body cameras and the witnesses. But Tyler wasn't resisting. He was flailing in pure terror as he was manhandled. Stella Higgins, the diner manager, dropped her rag and rushed out from behind the counter. "Bradley, stop it. What the hell is wrong with you? He's just a kid doing his homework. Back off, Stella. This is police business. Interfere, and I'll arrest you too," Collins barked, spinning Tyler around and slamming him chest first into the edge of the booth. The breath was violently knocked out of Tyler's lungs. He let out a choked, pained gasp. "My dad," Tyler wheezed, tears of pain and humiliation stinging his eyes as Collins forced his arms behind his back with enough torque to threaten a dislocation. "My dad is coming." "Shut up about your dad," Collins spat, pulling his heavy metal handcuffs from his belt. He snapped the cold steel brutally tight around Tyler's left wrist, ignoring the boy's cries of pain, and aggressively yanked his right arm back to secure the second cuff. Tyler was sobbing now, not just from the physical pain shooting up his shoulders, but from the devastating, crushing humiliation. The other patrons in the diner were frozen, watching in horrified silence. No one stepped in. No one helped. The badge Collins wore was a shield of absolute intimidation. Collins swept Tyler's legs out from under him. The boy crashed hard onto the black and white tiled floor, his cheek smacking against the cold, dirty linoleum. Collins immediately drove his heavy knee squarely between Tyler's shoulder blades, pinning the helpless teenager to the ground. "We've got a string of burglaries in this neighborhood, and you fit the description perfectly." Collins sneered down at the boy, pressing his knee harder into Tyler's spine. It was a blatant lie, a fabrication invented on the spot to justify his violent power trip. "You're going to juvenile lockup, boy." Stella had her phone in her hand, her fingers trembling as she dialed 911 to report an officer, entirely unsure if it would even do any good. "I'm calling the chief, Bradley. You've lost your damn mind. He was just drinking a milkshake. Call whoever you want." Collins scoffed. practically vibrating with the adrenaline of dominating someone weaker than him. He grabbed Tyler by the chain of the handcuffs and began to haul him up from the floor like a sack of garbage. "Come on, tough guy. Let's get you to the cruiser." Tyler felt a tear roll down his cheek, mixing with the dirt on his face. He felt entirely broken. The world felt dangerous, corrupt, and terrifying. Then, the diner bell chimed again. It wasn't a rush of cold wind this time. It was a shift in the atmosphere. A man stood in the doorway. He was in his early 40s, wearing a faded leather jacket over a plain black t-shirt, dark jeans, and sturdy boots. He looked exhausted. He had a few days of dark stubble on his jawline, and deep, dark circles under his piercing brown eyes. He looked like a man who had spent the last 3 weeks swimming with sharks and had barely survived to tell the tale. It was Harry Jenkins. Harry took exactly 1 step into the diner before he stopped. His eyes, trained to assess threats in a fraction of a second, took in the scene with terrifying speed. He saw the spilled milkshake. He saw the terrified patrons. He saw the panicked manager on the phone. And then he saw his 15-year-old son, his only child, handcuffed, crying, with a bruised cheek, being dragged by the collar by a uniformed police officer. For a microscopic fraction of a second, Harry's heart stopped. The father in him wanted to scream, but Harry Jenkins was not just a father. He was a highly trained, deeply experienced federal agent who specialized in dismantling violent cartels. The panic died instantly, replaced by a cold, surgical, and utterly lethal rage. His posture shifted. The exhaustion vanished. He didn't yell. He didn't run. He walked forward with slow, measured, deliberate steps. His eyes locked dead onto Officer Bradley Collins. Collins, sensing the movement, snapped his head up. He saw a rough-looking black man in a leather jacket approaching him. Given his deeply ingrained prejudices, Collins immediately assessed Harry as just another threat, another degenerate. "Hold it right there," Collins commanded, his hand dropping to his service weapon. He kept his grip on Tyler's cuffs. "Back up, buddy. This is an active crime scene. You take 1 more step, and you're going in the back of the cruiser with him." Harry stopped about 10 feet away. His face was a mask of absolute stone. The silence in the diner was absolute, heavy enough to crush bone. "Dad," Tyler choked out, his voice cracking. "Dad, I didn't do anything, I swear." Collins let out a harsh, mocking laugh. "Dad? Oh, this is rich. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, does it? Tell you what, Dad, you can come down to the station and post his bail. After he's booked for resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer." Harry didn't look at Tyler. If he looked at his son's bruised face, he knew he might lose the ironclad control he was desperately holding on to. He kept his eyes locked onto Collins. "Take the cuffs off my son," Harry said. His voice was not loud. It wasn't a shout. It was a low, terrifyingly calm vibration that seemed to make the very air in the diner drop 10 degrees. It was the voice of a man who gave orders to very dangerous people for a living. Collins felt a strange prickle of unease run down the back of his neck, but his ego quickly squashed it. He puffed out his chest. "Listen to me, you piece of garbage. I am an officer of the law. I give the orders here. Now turn around. Put your hands on your head, or I am going to put you on the ground." Harry tilted his head a fraction of an inch. His right hand moved, sliding slowly inside his leather jacket. "Gun!" Collins shouted, drawing his service weapon in a flash of panic, aiming it squarely at Harry's chest. "Hands where I can see them! Pull it out, slow!" Stella screamed. Tyler squeezed his eyes shut, terrified he was about to watch his father die. Harry's expression didn't change. He didn't flinch at the barrel of the Glock pointed at his heart. Slowly, deliberately, he withdrew his hand from his jacket. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding a small, navy blue leather wallet. With a flick of his wrist, the wallet flipped open. A heavy gold shield caught the harsh fluorescent light of the diner. gleaming brightly next to a crisp federal identification card. Special Agent Harry Jenkins, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Harry read out loud, his voice cutting through the tension like a straight razor. He took one step closer, directly into the barrel of Collins's gun. "And if you don't unholster that weapon and take those cuffs off my son in the next 3 seconds. Officer, I am going to dismantle your life piece by piece." Collins froze, the color violently draining from his face as his eyes locked onto the gold FBI shield. The predator had just realized he was locked in a cage with a monster. The heavy service weapon in Officer Bradley Collins' hand suddenly felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. The harsh, fluorescent lights of Rusty's diner glinted off the gold FBI shield held perfectly still in Harry Jenkins' grasp. The air in the room, previously thick with Collins' manufactured tension, instantly evaporated into a cold, suffocating vacuum of terror for the corrupt policeman. For 15 years, Collins had operated under the absolute certainty that his uniform was an impenetrable armor against consequence. He was used to dealing with scared teenagers, exhausted shift workers, and people who didn't know their rights. He was completely unequipped to handle a supervisory special agent from the federal government, especially one whose son he had just brutalized. I didn't know," Collins stammered, his voice entirely stripped of its previous booming bravado. It was suddenly high, thin, and remarkably pathetic. The gun trembled in his grip. "Holster your weapon," Harry repeated. His voice remained at that low, terrifyingly even pitch. He didn't blink. "If I have to ask you a third time, officer, I will consider you an active threat to a federal agent and a civilian, and I will neutralize you. Holster it." Now, Collins practically dropped the Glock in his frantic haste to shove it back into its Kydex holster. The satisfying click of the weapon securing itself was the only sound in the diner. Collins took a step back, his hands held out defensively, palms forward. "Look, Agent Jenkins." Collins tried a sickly, desperate smile, his mind racing to construct a lie that could save him. "This is just a massive misunderstanding. We've had a string of break-ins. Save it." Harry cut him off with the sharpness of a guillotine. He didn't even raise his voice, yet the command forced Collins' mouth shut with an audible click of his teeth. Harry finally broke eye contact with the officer and looked down at his son. Tyler was still on his knees, his face pressed near the dirty linoleum, his arms painfully wrenched behind his back in the heavy steel cuffs. The sight sent a wave of white-hot, agonizing rage through Harry's chest, but he forced it down into a tight, focused sphere. Emotion made you sloppy. Cold precision got the job done. "Keys," Harry demanded, holding out his left hand toward Collins, while his right hand smoothly tucked his badge back into his leather jacket. Collins fumbled frantically at his duty belt, his thick fingers slipping on the metal clasp of his key ring. He finally yanked the small universal handcuff key free and handed it to Harry, his hand shaking violently. Harry snatched the key without a word. Harry knelt beside his son on the checkered floor. The transition from lethal federal agent to gentle, concerned father was instantaneous. "I've got you, T," Harry whispered softly, his hands moving with practiced speed. He slid the key into the mechanism, turning it with a sharp twist. The metal jaws released. Tyler gasped, instantly pulling his arms forward, rubbing the angry red welts that had already formed on his wrists. Harry helped his son to his feet, pulling the shaking teenager into a tight, protective embrace. Tyler buried his face in his father's leather jacket. The dam, finally breaking, as quiet, muffled sobs racked his shoulders. Harry held him tightly, one hand cradling the back of Tyler's head, his eyes burning with a fierce, protective fire as he glared over his son's shoulder at Collins. "Did he hit you?" Harry asked quietly into Tyler's ear. Just shoved me into the table and the floor," Tyler managed to choke out, wiping his eyes with the sleeve of his hoodie. "Dad, I was just doing my history homework." "I know, buddy. I know," Harry murmured, stepping back to inspect the swelling red mark on Tyler's cheekbone where he had hit the floor. Harry's jaw tightened. He turned back to the trembling officer. Collins was sweating profusely now. The adrenaline of his power trip had entirely crashed, leaving him drowning in the horrifying realization of his own actions. Agent Jenkins. Man to man. Professional courtesy. The kid knocked his book over. He was acting erratic, reaching into his bag. Professional courtesy? Harry echoed, the words dripping with absolute disgust. He stepped away from Tyler, closing the distance between himself and Collins until they were barely a foot apart. Collins was physically larger, but Harry's presence made him look small and insignificant. "You want professional courtesy?" Harry asked. His voice, a lethal whisper. "You violently assaulted a minor, without provocation, without probable cause, and without a shred of human decency. You profiled a 15-year-old boy doing his homework. You deprived him of his civil rights, under color of law." Collins swallowed hard, a drop of sweat rolling down his thick neck. "I was conducting an investigation." "You were conducting a power trip," Harry corrected sharply. He turned to the manager, who was still standing behind the counter, clutching her cell phone to her chest. "Ma'am? What's your name?" "Stella," she breathed out, her eyes wide. "Stella Higgins. Stella, do you have security cameras in here?" Harry pointed to the dark dome on the ceiling in the corner. "Yes, sir. High definition. Records straight to a hard drive in the back office." "Good." Harry nodded. He pulled his own sleek, black smartphone from his pocket. "I need you to lock that office door. Do not let anyone touch that system until I have a federal evidence team here to extract it. Not him." Harry pointed a rigid finger at Collins. "And not anyone from his department." "Done," Stella said emphatically. She glared at Collins. "I've been telling the chief for years you were a liability, Bradley. You finally picked the wrong kid." Harry unlocked his phone and dialed a number he knew by heart. It wasn't 911. It wasn't the local precinct dispatcher. It was the direct, unlisted cell phone number of William Foster, the chief of police for Oakhaven. "Chief Foster," Harry said when the line connected. His tone was strictly business, devoid of any warmth. "This is Supervisory Special Agent Harry Jenkins, FBI." There was a pause on the line. "Agent Jenkins? I know the name. You work out of the regional field office. What can I do for you at this hour?" "I'm currently standing in Rusty's Diner on Route 9, Harry said, his eyes never leaving Collins' pale, sweating face. "I suggest you put your pants on and get down here immediately, because one of your officers, a Bradley Collins, just unlawfully detained, assaulted and drew a firearm on my unarmed 15-year-old son." A heavy silence fell over the phone. Then, a sharp intake of breath. Agent Jenkins. Are you certain?" "Collins is..." "Chief," Harry interrupted, his voice turning to ice. "I am standing over the spilled milkshake my son was drinking while he did his AP history homework. I am looking at the bruises on my son's wrists from your officer's handcuffs. If you are not walking through these diner doors in exactly 10 minutes, my next call is to the Director of the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division, and I will personally see to it that your entire department is placed under a federal consent decree by morning." 10 minutes. Harry ended the call without waiting for a reply. He slipped the phone back into his pocket. Collins looked like a man who had just been diagnosed with a terminal illness. His bottom lip quivered. "Agent Jenkins, please. My pension. My family. I have a wife. You should have thought about your family before you decided to terrorize mine," Harry said coldly, turning his back on the officer. He guided Tyler back to the booth, carefully avoiding the spilled milkshake, and sat down across from him. "Go wait by the door, officer," Harry commanded without looking back. "And keep your hands away from your belt." Collins, utterly defeated and stripped of all his false authority, shuffled toward the front of the diner like a reprimanded child. The remaining patrons, who had watched the entire ordeal in stunned silence, now looked at Collins with overt contempt. The spell was broken. The town bully had finally been cornered. True to Harry's warning, it took exactly 9.5 minutes for Chief William Foster to arrive. The diner doors flew open, and a tall, greying man in a hastily thrown-on police uniform jacket over civilian clothes hurried inside. Chief Foster looked stressed, his eyes immediately darting around the room to assess the damage. He saw Collins standing by the door, looking completely broken. Then he saw Harry Jenkins sitting quietly in the booth with Tyler. Foster took a deep breath, mentally preparing himself for the political and legal nightmare that was about to unfold. He walked over to the booth, projecting an air of professional calm that he absolutely did not feel. "Agent Jenkins," Foster said, stopping a respectful distance from the table. "I'm Chief Foster. I want to apologize profusely for whatever happened here. I assure you, Oakhaven takes these matters very seriously." Harry didn't stand up. He slowly finished wiping a spot of spilled milkshake off Tyler's history textbook with a napkin. When he finally looked up, his eyes were devoid of any sympathy. "Do you take them seriously, Chief Foster?" Harry asked quietly. "Because from where I'm sitting, your department employs a thug who feels comfortable assaulting a black teenager reading a textbook in a public establishment, unprovoked. That tells me a lot about the culture you tolerate." Foster flushed, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "Now, Agent Jenkins, let's not jump to conclusions about the whole department based on one incident. Collins has been with us a long time. We can handle this internally. Internal Affairs will open a file first thing tomorrow morning. We'll suspend him with pay, pending an investigation." "No," Harry said simply. The single syllable hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "Excuse me." Foster frowned. Harry leaned forward, resting his forearms on the table. The federal agent's aura of command entirely enveloped the local police chief. "There will be no internal investigation, Chief. There will be no paid administrative leave. You are not sweeping this under the rug with a slap on the wrist and a mandatory sensitivity training course." Harry stood up then, his height and broad shoulders forcing Foster to take a half step back. "Let me explain to you exactly what is happening right now. Title 18, United States Code, Section 242, makes it a federal crime for any person acting under color of law to willfully deprive any person of a right or privilege protected by the Constitution. That includes protection against unreasonable search and seizure, and protection against the use of excessive force." Foster swallowed hard. "Harry, please, let's just—" "While I was waiting for you," Harry continued seamlessly, ignoring the interruption, "I made another phone call. I had an analyst at the regional office run a preliminary background check on Officer Collins. I wanted to see if tonight was an anomaly. It wasn't, was it?" "Chief?" Foster's eyes darted toward the floor. He knew the truth. 15 years on the force, Harry stated, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet diner. 7 formal complaints for excessive force, 4 complaints for racial profiling, 3 lawsuits settled quietly out of court by the city. And you left him on the street. You kept a predator in uniform because it was politically convenient for your union. That's not fair, Foster weakly protested. The union doesn't dictate federal law, Harry snapped, his patience finally fraying. He pointed a finger squarely at Foster's chest. This stops tonight. I am officially opening a preliminary federal civil rights investigation into Officer Bradley Collins. And because his file suggests a systemic pattern of abuse that has been willfully ignored by your leadership, I am also requesting the Department of Justice initiate a pattern or practice investigation into the entire Oakhaven Police Department. Chief Foster physically sagged. The color drained from his face. A DOJ pattern or practice investigation was the nuclear option. It meant federal monitors, massive public audits, lawsuits, and highly likely the end of his career as chief. You're destroying my department over one bad stop? Foster asked, his voice trembling with anger and fear. I'm saving this town from your gross negligence. Harry shot back. He turned his gaze toward the front of the diner, where Collins was trying to make himself as small as possible. As for him, he doesn't go home tonight. What do you mean? Foster asked. I mean, he committed assault and battery against a minor, and aggravated assault by drawing a deadly weapon without cause, Harry said. I have a credible witness in the manager, physical evidence on my son's wrists, and high-definition CCTV footage that I am having federal techs seize within the hour. If you do not arrest him right now, Chief Foster, I will arrest him myself on federal charges, and I will add you as a co-conspirator for obstruction of justice. The silence in the diner was absolute. The sheer, overwhelming power of the federal government, driven by the righteous fury of a wronged father, had entirely cornered the corrupt local system. There was no way out. The good old boys club had just hit a brick wall. Foster looked at Harry, then looked at Tyler, who was watching him with wide, fearful eyes. The chief knew he was beaten. He knew he was wrong. With a heavy sigh that seemed to age him 10 years, Foster turned around and walked slowly toward the front door. Collins watched his chief approach, a look of desperate, pleading panic on his face. Chief, please. Don't let him do this. I'm one of yours. We protect our own. Not anymore, Bradley, Foster said, his voice hollow. You went too far. Way too far. Chief! Please! Collins begged, tears actually springing to his eyes as reality finally shattered his ego. My pension. My life. You can't just throw me to the wolves. Turn around, Officer Collins, Foster commanded, his voice hardening as he unclipped his own handcuffs from his belt. Put your hands behind your back. No, Collins whimpered, shaking his head, instinctively backing away until he bumped against the glass door of the diner. The man who, barely half an hour ago, had violently slammed a child onto the floor for dropping a book, was now weeping like a coward. Bradley, do not make me fight you, Foster warned, stepping forward and grabbing Collins by the arm. He forcefully spun the larger man around. You are under arrest for aggravated assault and battery. You have the right to remain silent. Tyler watched in stunned awe from the booth as the Miranda rights were read. The man who had terrorized him, who had made him feel utterly powerless and humiliated, was now being stripped of his gun, his badge, and his dignity. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked into place around Collins' wrists, the very same sound that had terrified Tyler moments before. The karma was absolute, swift, and poetic. Collins was roughly escorted out of the diner by his own boss, shoved unceremoniously into the back of a police cruiser, his career and freedom extinguished in the span of a single evening. Harry watched the cruiser pull away, its taillights fading into the rainy night. The tension slowly drained from his shoulders. The predator was caged. The threat was neutralized. He turned back to the booth and sat down heavily across from his son. The federal agent faded away, leaving only the exhausted, deeply relieved father. He reached across the table, gently covering Tyler's shaking hand with his own. It's over, T, Harry said softly, a tired, reassuring smile finally breaking across his face. He's gone. He's never going to hurt you or anyone else ever again. Tyler looked at his father, the fear in his eyes slowly being replaced by an overwhelming sense of safety and immense pride. He squeezed his dad's hand tightly. Thanks, Dad, Harry chuckled softly, glancing down at the ruined history essay and the spilled milkshake. Come on, let's get out of here. I think you've had enough history for one night. Let's go home. The dawn broke over Oakhaven not with the gentle light of a typical Wednesday, but with the blinding, unforgiving glare of federal scrutiny. By 8:00 a.m., a fleet of black government-issued SUVs had surrounded the Oakhaven Police Department. Special Agent Harry Jenkins was a man of his word. He hadn't just made a threat in the heat of the moment. He had pulled the trigger on a massive, highly coordinated strike against a deeply rotten institution The hammer fell with breathtaking speed. Led by Assistant United States Attorney Richard Sterling, a notoriously ruthless federal prosecutor who specialized in civil rights abuses, the Department of Justice seized the precinct. They boxed up hard drives, confiscated decades of internal affairs files, and isolated the department's servers. The good old boys club that had protected men like Bradley Collins for a generation was dismantled in a single morning. Bradley Collins' arraignment was a public spectacle of humiliation. He stood before a federal judge in a bright orange jumpsuit, his hands the same hands that had violently thrown a 15-year-old boy to the floor, now secured in heavy iron shackles. The local police union, initially prepared to mount a fierce defense, completely abandoned him the moment AUSA Sterling played the high-definition CCTV footage from Rusty's diner in open court. The footage was entirely damning. It showed a quiet, respectful teenager doing his homework, followed by a shocking, unprovoked display of sheer brutality. It showed Collins drawing a deadly weapon on an unarmed father. But the federal audit uncovered something even worse. Emboldened by the DOJ's presence, a younger whistleblower within the department finally stepped forward. He handed federal investigators a hidden flash drive containing hours of Collins' malfunctioning body camera footage from previous stops. The drive proved a horrific, years-long pattern of systemic abuse, racial profiling, and planted evidence. Collins hadn't just made a mistake with Tyler. He had been operating as a federally indictable predator for a decade, facing a mountain of indisputable evidence and a potential 20-year sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary. The tough guy facade that Collins had worn his entire adult life completely collapsed. He wept openly in his holding cell, desperate to save himself. He took a binding plea deal. Bradley Collins pleaded guilty to 3 federal counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. He was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole. As part of his felony conviction, his lucrative state pension was permanently stripped from him and repurposed to pay restitution to the dozens of families he had terrorized over the years. The fallout didn't stop at Collins. Chief William Foster, facing severe charges of obstruction and conspiracy for his years of covering up the abuse, was forced into a disgraceful, immediate retirement. The Department of Justice placed the entire Oak Haven Police Department under a strict, multi-year federal consent decree, fundamentally restructuring how they policed the community. As for the Jenkins family, the city of Oak Haven attempted to offer a massive, quiet, multi-million-dollar settlement to avoid a civil lawsuit. Harry and Tyler accepted it, but they didn't keep a single dime. Harry established the Rusty's Diner Defense Fund, a legal charity dedicated to providing top-tier representation for low-income minorities who were victims of police brutality in upstate New York. 6 months after the incident, the neon sign of Rusty's Diner still buzzed in the rain, but the atmosphere in the town had fundamentally shifted. A new, federally monitored police chief had fired 6 other officers connected to Collins' corrupt clique. On a bright, sunny Saturday afternoon, miles away from Oak Haven, the starting pistol cracked at the regional high school track and field championships. Tyler Jenkins exploded off the starting blocks, his legs pumping with furious, disciplined power. He was no longer the terrified boy pinned to the linoleum floor. He had gone through intense therapy, flanked by the unwavering support of a father who had moved heaven and earth to protect him. Tyler had learned that true strength wasn't loud, bullying, or abusive. True strength was the quiet, terrifying resolve of a man who knew exactly how to stand up for what was right. Tyler crossed the finish line, breaking the tape to win the 4:00-meter dash. As he slowed his pace, catching his breath, he looked up into the crowded bleachers. Standing in the front row, wearing his faded leather jacket and a wide, incredibly proud smile, was Harry. The federal agent clapped his hands loudly, pointing down at his son. Tyler grinned back, raising his hand in a silent salute to the man who hadn't just saved his life that night, but who had changed the world to ensure it would never happen to anyone else. Justice isn't just a word. Sometimes It's a father with an FBI badge bringing the ultimate karma down on a corrupt system. Tyler's harrowing experience at that diner sparked a massive change,